Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to the Talking Philly Sports with Matty B program here on the Edge of Philly Sports with your boy Matty B. It is Monday, September the 18th, 2023. It is around 8 p.m., and you're watching EOP, so that means you're here with me once again, and it is an honor and a privilege to be back in front of you tonight on a busy night here on the program and as well in the Philadelphia sports scene. So let's not waste any time, shall we? Let's dig right into this. Tonight on the show, I got a surprise. A special treat, if you will, for you out there. The voice of the Flyers, Jim Jackson, is going to be joining me here in about 2 or 3 minutes and giving me some of his time as we're going to kind of talk about exactly what the new era of orange is for the Philadelphia Flyers and some expectations and make kind of like a check-in, I guess, if you will, on the current state of the 2023-2024 Philadelphia Flyers. And then a little bit later on, my main man, Kyle Quinn, the midday producer from WIP, will check in with me as he does every week for our Birds Breakdown with Kyle Quinn segment, as we'll go over Eagles, Vikings, and look ahead to Eagles, Buccaneers for week 3 next Monday night. But before we do that, let's do what we do every week here on the program around this time, and that is go over your day in Philadelphia sports history. That is I enjoy doing this. It kind of gets my brain moving, and I get to exercise my research skills by turning pages in a book. It sounds ridiculous, but in 2023, it's actually pretty therapeutic for me. So I went back and looked, and on September the 18th, there's really not like what I would call sexy stuff, right? Not juicy. But there was something on 2019 that, or not 2019, but September 19th that I did find pretty intriguing. Did you guys know that on this date, back in 19 or 2013, was the date that the Philadelphia Eagles honored and retired Donovan McNabb's number. It was the infamous "5 will always love you" speech out there at Lincoln Financial Field. It was during halftime of the Kansas City Chief game where the Eagles ended up losing 26-16. It also was, of course, Andy Reid's first visit back to Lincoln Financial Field after he was hired on as the Chiefs head coach and, of course, fired by the Eagles. So Donovan McNabb, who, there's kind of like two sides of a Donovan McNabb fence, right? There's the ones that, ushered in the new era of Philadelphia quarterback play. I mean, a dominant quarterback that we hadn't had in a long time. And then there's the booing him on draft day for lieu of Ricky Williams crowd. I guess I kind of sit on top of the fence on that because there were moments in Donovan's career that I thought this was the best thing that's ever happened to us. And there were moments, of course, in his career where, God, I would have wondered what Ricky Williams would have looked like, not high, but playing here for the Philadelphia Eagles in his prime. But today, on this date, or on September 19th, Donovan McNabb had his number retired by the Philadelphia Eagles. And, of course, number 5 will always love you. So that was your day in Philadelphia sports history, brought to you by the fine folks over here at the Talking Philly Sports with Matty B program. So let's get into what you really came here for, not to hear me ramble on. Let's bring on my first guest. You guys will know him. You'll understand. You'll recognize him by his voice. He is the voice of the Philadelphia Flyers. Mr. Jim Jackson joins us. JJ, what is going on? Thank you for taking some time with me tonight.
Nice to be here, Matt. How are you?
I'm doing absolutely fantabulous.
It's interesting you bring up that it's been 10 years, first of all,
yeah,
which is hard to believe. But Adam, when you think about Andy Reid and all he's accomplished since then, and where he stood in the lexicon of Philadelphia sports then was as the coach that couldn't get him to the promised land quite, and he's kind of proven he can do that. He's got a dynasty going right now, so it's interesting how time changes your perspective on things.
And it's, of course, a little bit more doubly sour with the fact that the Chiefs beat the Eagles last year in a Super Bowl that was right in the Eagles' grasp, and they just couldn't.
It was right there,
around it. All right, JJ, let's transition, of course, for the real reason why you're here, not to talk to the Eagles, but I'm sure you're totally equipped to. But we all want to hear your take on the Philadelphia Flyers. A lot has happened to this organization, in the last 5 months, and let's kind of start from the beginning, where I consider the beginning. The transitional interim hire of Danny Briere. I remember that day very vividly. It was on a Friday that he was hired or was put in charge of the Flyers on an interim basis. And I noticed one thing about him when he made his introductory speech. He said the word rebuild, Jim, and it was such a breath of fresh air. And I'm sure a lot of other Flyer fans felt the same way. Did you get that take as well when you heard Danny Briere talk the first time?
I did, but you know what? I am not into the rebuilds. It's all semantics. It really is. Any team that's missed the playoffs 3 straight years, you're rebuilding, whether you say it or not. I mean, you are. And the rebuild for the Flyers isn't starting and didn't start the day that Danny said the word. It had already started. Uh, Owen Tippett is part of the rebuild. So that we're not starting the rebuild now with Danny and Keith Jones. They're already hopping on while the rebuild has already started. You've got some good young pieces in place. You already had a stockpile of some draft picks. They've added to that since with a couple of moves. But the bottom line is this was not a rebuild that they were just entering into, which is why I also don't think it's going to take 7-8 years. If reading some people, you think that's what they're planning for, 7-8 years down the road. I think it's going to be much sooner than that. And in fact, I think if anything, everything breaks right, they could contend for a playoff spot as early as this year. I mean, a lot of questions have to be answered in the right way, but if Sean Couturier and Cam Atkinson come back and are productive players this year, and the goaltending situation is ironed out with all the stuff that's going on, you can't tell me the Flyers aren't at least right there in the middle of the pack, which is all you need to do to at least contend for a playoff spot. So I really, the rebuild, when he said it, it didn't strike me as, oh, finally, because I just think it's all semantics. Now, for the fans, maybe it's different. Maybe they need to hear that word being said. I do understand their angst over mixed messaging in recent years, because at times it was an aggressive retool. At times they were going to be buyers. They're going to be sellers. They're going to be this. They're going to be that. Now we know for sure that the look now is for the future. But as both Danny and Keith have said a lot recently, if you've been listening, the players are going to tell them what they do. And what they mean by that is if the players struggle this year, and this team's near the bottom of the standings come January, February, they're going to trade some key pieces to get some more capital for down the road. But if the players play well and are in contention for a playoff spot, I'm not saying they're going to trade for old rental, no, but they're going to temper a little bit what they're going to do and try to make the playoffs. So I have full confidence in Danny and Keith doing what needs to be done. But obviously the eye is toward the future as much as possible. And the players will tell them when it's time to start adding to the mix to make a push, which we're not close to that yet. But you don't know if that might be sooner than some people think.
Now, you mentioned Keith Jones a couple times in that little thing there. Obviously, Keith, is your former broadcasting partner, has now moved on to bigger and better things as the president of hockey operations. Obviously, I'm thrilled for it. It was a hire that kind of came out of nowhere. Can you reveal if you had any information about this coming up on the hire, or was
None.
this just as a surprise to you as it was everybody else?
No, he's very good at keeping things close to the vest. I think after the fact, he told a couple people, obviously his family and a couple of other people, but no one, I don't even think Danny Briere knew. So, I mean, he kept it very quiet. I do, in retrospect, think back to some conversations we had where his philosophy seemed to change a little bit from what I had always heard from him, and where I should have probably thought something was up, but I never would have guessed that he was going to become president of the team. There's just no way. I mean, he's just, when you think about what he had, it was a pretty good gig. So what he's giving it up for is also a very good gig, but a more challenging gig. I mean, he is going from being as good as it gets at the top of his field in terms of being an analyst and not being criticized, for what's going to happen out on the ice or anything, to facing criticism if things don't go well. But I don't think that'll bother him. He's not somebody who really listens to the outside noise. He's not even on social media. So I think you're looking at a situation where he'll handle that fine. But I had no idea it was coming. I think he's perfect for it. People who tell me an announcer becomes the president of the team. Well, when we used to go on the road, we'd be in the media room. The general managers and presidents of other teams, they sought Jonesy out. Joe Sakic would come find Jonesy. Jim Rutherford would come find Jonesy. Ken Holland would come find. They wanted to find out what he knew, because he's been around the league. He sees all the players and what he's been doing as a national commentator. And he's talked to coaches. He's talked to players. He's talked to general managers. He's as tied in as you can possibly be. The only way he could have more experience doing what he's doing is if he had been president of another team, you know? And so I think he's completely prepared for it and perfectly suited for it. And I know he's excited about the challenge. And he really feels a debt of gratitude to the Flyers organization for what they did for him after he retired as a player and how they took care of him and helped him get into the broadcasting. And he wants to get this franchise back to where they were as perennial contenders. And I think he's got what it takes to do that. So I think it's a really good fit. And Danny Briere, the same thing. People who say, he has no experience. You could not be more experienced than Danny Briere is outside of being an ex-GM of another team. He stopped being a player. He went down to the lower level of minors, saw how it all worked. He's done everything at the upper level as well, overseeing as an assistant GM. He went to Wharton's business. I mean, he did whatever he could to prepare himself for what he's doing. So I think both guys are eminently prepared and good things are ahead for the Flyers.
Now, talking a little bit about Danny Briere and the Keith Jones effect, I agree. I'm not saying these guys, and I don't think a lot of Flyers fans think that they're unqualified per se for these positions. But again, the Flyers go ahead and they hire two former players in the organization. And I remember during the introductory press conference when both those positions were made permanent, John Tortorella got a little angst about that, saying, "Why is that such a bad thing?" Now, of course, we've been burned by former players who have sat in seats of management in the past. I'm not saying that that doesn't mean they deserve an opportunity. But what would you tell Flyers fans out there that still hold that resentment towards former players only seeming like getting positions of management for the Flyers when it comes to Danny Briere and Keith Jones?
I think it's a media-created, overdriven subject. I mean, this theory out there that I keep reading that Bob Clark, Paul Holmgren, and Bill Barber are the reason the Flyers are having problems is the most asinine thing I have ever heard. It's created by a couple of writers who pick that up and just send it out there all the time. And you know what? It's when you think about it, it makes, first of all, Ron Hextall, yes, a former Flyer, but when he was the general manager, he did not listen to those people. The Flyers went several years without them having any input. Where did that get them? That was not the problem with Ron Hextall as the general manager because they weren't really a part of it. As it turned out, that became part of the problem as far as why Ron, I think, eventually left. There wasn't a good symmetry there. And they're great hockey people. You say they've been burned. I can give you two examples of the best resurrections the Flyers have had in the last 3 decades since I've been here. One was when Bob Clark came back as general manager for a second turn, took over in 94-95. The team went from out of the playoffs 5 straight years to in the playoffs for about the next 8, going to the Stanley Cup Finals, Stanley Cup semifinals 3 times in the next 7 years. And then Paul Holmgren in 2006, 2007, the Flyers had their worst season ever. The next year, they went to the conference finals after he took over as GM and brought in a whole bunch. Now, he had a good cap situation. He could spend a lot of money. But he went out and got Kimmo Timonen and Scott Hartnell and Danny Briere and others, Marty Biron. And that team ended up in the conference semifinals and then finals in 2010. So don't gloss over and say they've been burned by these ex-players. They've also done some good things. Now, Paul Holmgren did some things that probably he'd even like to have back in terms of contracts toward the end of his reign, but he turned things around. People can't forget that either. And as a general manager of any team in any sport, eventually your time runs out and people just run you out of town, to be honest with you. It's a thankless task because everybody has a good answer, right? In retrospect, everybody's a genius. I'd like to take some of the tweets and some of the comments, if we recorded them, of some of the people and then play them back because we all are wrong, me included, very often. In retrospect, we're all geniuses. So to answer your question, I think I have, but to answer your question, it is such a overblown theory narrative. It has nothing to do with the problems the Flyers are having. This whole thing that those ex-Flyers influenced Chuck Fletcher's decisions or Ron Hextall's decisions, and that's why the Flyers are where they are because they had some crushing injuries. I mean, not 2-3 weeks or 2-3 months. I mean, season-long injuries to key players. They lost Matt Niskanen into retirement completely out of surprise and Chuck Fletcher could never quite replace him and made some mistakes in trying to replace him. And they had some rather mediocre to less than mediocre drafting from the mid-teens through about 2 or 3 years ago. So those are much more reasons why the team struggled. This narrative of they're stuck in the past, not at all. Ron Hextall really modernized their whole philosophy. They were not stuck in the past during that whole thing. In fact, he convinced Ed Snyder and Ed Snyder's last days not to try to go for the quick grab. So they settled in on trying to build through the draft. And quite frankly, the drafts just weren't good enough in those years to get them out of it. And then you throw on top of that the key injuries, they didn't have enough to recover, and they've had 3 straight years out of the playoffs. But it didn't have anything to do with Bob Clark telling Chuck Fletcher to do this, or Bob Clark telling Ron Hextall to do this, or Bill Barber or Paul Holmgren. That is so overblown. It just, Matt, do me a favor, just get it out of your head. It's not part. It's not really the reason that the team's where it's at right now. And Danny Briere and Keith Jones have already said, if those guys have something to offer, of course they're going to listen. Does that mean they're going to follow their every direction? No, but they're going to listen. Why would you not listen to guys who've been in this sport in those positions before? Hall of Famers in many cases. They're good hockey people. So of course you're going to listen to them. Doesn't mean that you're going to follow their every directive. And that's not the way it's been here over the last 10 years either. It's not like they've been running the team from down in Florida or wherever they are. It's just, it's a narrative that's been blown up out there. And it's just way overdone, if not completely false.
And now X-Flyers or not, X-Flyers or not X-Flyers, the bottom line is the team hasn't won a Stanley Cup on coming on 50 years. I mean, take that for what that is. We've had some successes. We've knocked on the door, but we haven't captured a cup since I was like 2 years old. And that is obviously the goal here is to win a Stanley Cup. And Bobby Clark, Ron Hextall, Paul Holmgren, Russ Farwell, we can go down the list all you want. Each GM has failed in that task, regardless of how far or how good things were. They still haven't captured the ultimate goal. So, I don't know if it's being stingy or what, but I want to win a Stanley Cup, and I know you do, and I know the Flyers want to win a Stanley Cup. The organization, Spectacor, wants to desperately win a Stanley Cup, and I'm I think Daniel Briere and Keith Jones, why not? Let them have a shot at it. I do like the direction that the team is going thus far. Daniel Briere comes out of the gate with a couple good trades. Let's talk about the Ivan Provorov trade real quick. Obviously, when you,
I do want to answer you. You were heading in a direction there, and I don't want you to. I'll talk about the Provorov trade all you want, but the whole thing about not winning the cup, the GM can only put the team in position to win the cup. Really, when you get down to winning a cup, it comes down to being healthy at the right time, some breaks, all that. And the Flyers, you have every right to be disappointed with the last 10 years because the Flyers have not been close to a cup in the last 10 to 12 years. The last time to the finals, 2010, they made it past into the second round in 2012. They made it in the second round of the bubble, but that was kind of a weird thing. They have not been Stanley Cup contenders now for a little while. So you can complain about that and what was happening with the leadership. But prior to that, they were in the conference finals or finals as much as any team over the period of time from their last cup in 1975 through 2010 or so. They were a team perennially, except for that 5-year gap as they got Lindros there in the late 80s into the early 90s. Outside of that 5-year gap, they were perennial Stanley Cup contenders. That's pretty much all the general manager can do is get the team into that stage. Howie Roseman's no worse a general manager last year than he was when the Eagles won the Super Bowl. But last year, they just barely missed, right? It wasn't Howie Roseman's fault. They missed out on the Super Bowl. They just happened to get beat at the – So when it gets down to the nitty-gritty, you mentioned all the GMs have failed. No, most of those GMs actually got the Flyers into a pretty good spot. Not necessarily Russ Farwell or Ron Hextall, but some of the other names you threw out there. If they got them to within a series win and certainly into the finals, the GM did something right. They put a roster together that got them really close. They got a coach in there that could get them really close. And really, once you get to that stage, it's basically you got to be healthy. I can come up with 5 examples in my time here where the Flyers ran out of players, and they might have won the cup in 2004, just ran out of defensemen. I mean, they could have won the cup in 2010. That series could have gone either way. It was a wacky series. So
We talk about running up against Gretzky and you come running up against that Detroit Red Wing team of the late '90s. I get that. That was a Herculean task for anybody to try to beat those teams. I mean, Gretzky is the greatest hockey player that's ever played, and he played for one of the greatest teams that ever played. So I understand that the Flyers might have not have had some good luck when it came to their competition as well. I do know there's other factors involved, but the bottom line is we haven't won a cup.
Yeah, but you make it sound because they haven't won a cup. I can go around and ask GMs from around the league. And again, this is all prior to the last decade. The last decade has been disappointing. They have not been in contention. So you can complain and think there's something systemic, something out there that needs to be changed. And I think that's what Danny and Keith are going to try to do. But up until that point, they were in the running all the time. There was nothing wow, they can't quite win that final game or win that final series. What's missing? It's just 1 year to the next. They almost took down that Edmonton team in '87. I mean, it was game 7 for crying out loud. You get to that stage, it's not about something being wrong necessarily. It's just it didn't quite get done. So this is and again, I mean, Toronto's got this same thing. They have a longer drought, right? But Toronto didn't make it to the second round of the playoffs from 2004 until last year. I mean, that's when you start saying, wow, they're not even getting close. The Flyers were getting close. They haven't been the last 10 to 12 years. That's concerning. That's why I think Danny and Keith are going to try to get things, past that stage. Part of it was that this was always Ed Snyder was a very passionate owner, and he wanted to always be good, and that was a good thing, especially before the salary cap. He would do whatever it took to be competitive, spend whatever it took. I can tell you right now, the Flyers still spend a ton of money. They go up against the cap most years. They spend a ton of money on their players in terms of the conditioning, about the facilities, about travel, all that. Another one of those narratives out there, Comcast doesn't care, so they don't spend any money. You can only spend so much on salaries because of the salary cap. They spend a lot of money on everything else, more than most teams. So that's not a problem either, as far as being unwilling to spend. You have to spend smartly in order to, under the cap, be successful. They've been lacking in that area over the last 10 years. Obviously, the results just tell you that. So the bottom line is that that's another one of those things out there. They haven't won a cup in almost 50 years. So what's wrong? Well, over the last 10 years, they haven't competed. They have not been close to it. So, yes, we need to examine that. But prior to that, this team was always in the running. And that's really all you can do as a general manager and, as the coach to some degree. It comes down to one or two plays here or there, certain guys being injured. I mean, the Flyers would have won 3 straight Stanley Cups if they hadn't had Rick McLeish out in '76 and Bernie Parent unable to play. I mean, you can go all the way back to that one. I mean, so it's just not as easy as to say there's something wrong because they haven't won the cup in 50 years. And there are other teams who haven't won the cup. There's some teams that haven't won a cup at all that have been in the league that long. But, yeah, they have one of the longest droughts. It's frustrating. But if you keep putting yourself in position, you're going to. And the Flyers, for 4 decades out of that, haven't the last decade. That's why they need to really examine this. And that's what I think the new leadership is doing.
And real quickly about the Provorov trade, not to get into it specifically or in the nuts and bolts about it, but Provorov, Kevin Hayes were moved this offseason. There's speculation that those players were moved from various reasons. One of the reasons, obviously, was when you're trying to get younger, you got to get rid of some of your talent, some of your established veteran talent. Both those players are established veteran players, but also the narrative around is that they necessarily did not see eye to eye with Coach John Tortorella. Either way, obviously, you got to do what you got to do to get this team better. Are the Flyers a better team now in the holistic approach without Ivan Provorov and Kevin Hayes?
Oh, you lose a lot of talent there. So you can't. They obviously in Provorov's case, you lose the guy who was your number one defenseman. Whether he is a number one NHL defenseman or not, I think is debatable. Yeah. But he was the Flyers' number one defenseman in terms of ice time for the last 7-8 years. So absolutely. He is a guy who you're going to miss those minutes. And Kevin Hayes is a proven top 6 to top 9 forward in the NHL. Those don't come along easily either. But what these moves were about was what John Tortorella talked about late last year, subtraction. Mainly because, as you pointed out, Matt, these guys were not going to play well, I don't think, under John Tortorella. I don't think Kevin Hayes saw himself as a winger. And I don't think John Tortorella saw him as a center. So that was untenable. They had to move on. Ivan Provorov, I don't think Tortorella had as much a problem with Provorov as the other way around. I'm not sure Provy, by the end of last year, he seemed like he just wasn't happy about a lot in Philadelphia. Not just John Tortorella, just didn't seem happy with much of anything. And so, and then Tony DeAngelo, something happened there late last year where he ended up getting scratched. So these players, and James Van Riemsdyk was just a contract situation. But those other three were subtraction because I don't think they felt those three mixed with the culture that has been created now, the atmosphere, the vibe of John Tortorella. As he mentioned late last year, this offseason will be about subtraction. I think it was much more about that kind of subtraction than it was the rebuild part of it. Because Provorov's not that old. They didn't have to move on. Tony DeAngelo's not that old either. It's not like they're moving on from them just because they want to get young players. I think they move these players out because they want the young players who are here to be around players who really will buy in to what's being pitched. So I think that's what happened. Now, in the Provorov deal in particular, Danny did a masterful job of subtracting a player that he didn't see, evidently is a guy who could move forward in this system. And at the same time, getting back a lot of assets, draft picks, a prospect. That was a masterful trade. It had to be very creative. It was a heck of a first trade. The other two you saw were absolute just subtractions. They didn't get much back at all, only saved half of Hayes' salary, and DeAngelo is just pretty much given, bought out. So, they couldn't get much for those guys, but they felt it was that important that they had to move on from those guys, bring in guys that they felt were going to buy into the system. And so that's what they did. And most likely they're going to be replaced, as it turns out, by younger players. That's part of what happens when you're in this situation, of course. But I think it had as much to do with the subtraction part of it as it did the youth part of it.
Yeah, and the Flyers did bring in some veteran players this offseason.
They did. And that goes to show you that there are those who think the Flyers are in this rebuild where they're going to try to finish near the bottom of the standings and get high draft picks for the next 3 years, a la the Sixers, right? Tanking, I believe is the word. That's not what this is. You don't go out and get a Garnet Hathaway and a Mark Stahl and even a Paling, for instance. You don't get those players if you're trying to lose games. They want the right players here to help the young players that are here develop in the way that they want them to develop. And so they went out and got veterans they think will really help along those lines and help win some hockey games. So this is not Danny's on record as saying this is not a tanking situation. They have 2 first-round picks next year. Maybe the Florida Panthers have a terrible year and they end up with a pretty high draft pick. But I don't think the Flyers are trying to gun for a lottery pick by finishing in the bottom 4 or 5 of the league. I think that they're going to try to win games this year. John Tortorella is not the kind of coach you would have if you're doing that either. He coaches to win every game he coaches. So it's not – some people are portraying the rebuild part of this as more of a Sixers kind of rebuild back in the process days. And I don't think that's what this is at all. So they're going to be competitive this year. They're going to try to be they were competitive last year in a lot of games. They basically were within a goal in the third period of about 85% of their games. If they just turned their overtime record around last year, they're in contention for the playoffs last year. So they can be very competitive if they don't get all banged up, as has been a major problem for them the last 3 or 4 years. If Couturier's comeback and Atkinson's comeback is legit, they're able to be productive players. This team can be very competitive even this year. So it's not a situation where you're necessarily going to look and see the Flyers at the very bottom of the standings. Now, if the Couturier comeback does not work, if he's unable to play, and same with Cam and Carter Hart's situation, who knows what's going to happen there. If everything goes the wrong way, yeah, they could still end up near the bottom of the standings. And I have full confidence in Keith Jones and Danny Briere to know what to do if that's the case. Then you might see some guys like Travis Konecny be moved at the trade deadline because you're going to be looking to collect more assets. But that's only if things go really wrong and the team is down near the bottom and completely out of the playoff race.
And with all that being said, though, John Tortorella did state this at the end of last season when asked about what was his impression of the young, I think it was the average age was 25 on the roster last year. He was asked about that. And I believe his paraphrase comment was, I want to be younger this year, meaning heading into this season. He wants to get even younger because of what he saw from some of the players, i.e. Noah Cates, Tyson Forrester at the end of the season a little bit there, maybe some Cam York sprinkled in there. really got I think his appetite wet about, what the future of this team might be. And he was pretty impressed by some of those younger players. So the future is all about the youngsters there. JJ, wouldn't you not agree though? And overall, but when you're trying to kind of go from where the Flyers are right now.
Yeah, I mean, that's what the exciting part of this year is going to be, is watching the young players and which ones take us another step. Owen Tippett last year took a step toward being a very good player in the NHL. I mean, a 30 to 35 goal scorer. Does he take even another step this year to all-star status? Travis Konecny took the step to all. He didn't make the all-star team, but I think everybody would agree he was the best forward on the team last year, along with Tippett. Noah Cates, can he take another step? Already one of the best defensive forwards in the league by the metrics. Can he add a little more offense to his game? Morgan Frost took steps last year. Does he continue the upward trend? Cam York's going to get a chance with a lot more ice time this year. Joel Farabee is a guy who now has a full summer of actual training under his belt. Is he stronger this year? Is he closer to the guy who scored 20 goals in 55 games in a shortened season a couple of years back? That translates to another 30-goal score. If you see some of these young guys take these steps, you can see how this team could be quite competitive this year. And there's some guys, Dyson Forster, you mentioned, who really looked good in a brief cameo last year. He's going to get every chance to make this team out of camp. And does he develop into a top 6 forward? And Emil Andre is a name to really a player to really watch. I love this kid. He has a confidence about him. It's a swagger. He's only 21, but he just seems like he's sure of himself. He's physical. He's creative. He's got a great shot. He can skate. Not a big guy, but and people consistently bring up the name Kimmo Timonen, and that's high praise, because Kimmo Timonen, in my mind, is maybe the 3rd best defenseman in Flyers history. There's some young players that are going to come on the scene this year. Maybe toward the end of the year, Cutter Gauthier makes an appearance. And then, of course, down the road, we've got this guy, over in Russia, down the road. And then you got 2 more first-round picks next year. So you see how it's building. They're accumulating the young talent. And this year is really all going to be about watching how the young talent develops. And then you see how you adjust the situation to it, from where the team wins and loses.
You mentioned Cutter Gauthier, and you mentioned that young man, who I believe is Matt V. Michkinoff, Flyers' 7th overall pick in the draft this year. Let's talk about Gauthier real quick. Obviously, there's Boston College last year. He made no bones about it when he got drafted. He was going to college, but I remember him saying he was thinking about being one and done with BC. And of course, this spring he said, "No, I'm going to go back for my sophomore year." That raised my eyebrows a little bit. And then he didn't show up for the developmental camp, and he said, "Well, a lot of hockey. I don't really have to go, and so I just kind of taking a break. I played in World Juniors, went to the Frozen Four. I'm burned out. I just want to take some time with my family and whatnot." Then you add the mix in of Danny Briere, allegedly did not know why he didn't show up for the developmental camp. Is there any course of concern for you, Jim Jackson, to think that Cutter Gauthier maybe is not all in about being a Flyer, or is this him just trying to do what's best for him right now at the stage of his career?
I don't know. I haven't talked to Cutter Gauthier in my life, so I wouldn't have an answer. I would say he doesn't have many options unless he wants to play 4 years at college and become a free agent in the 5th. That's really cutting a lot of years off of his career, because he's probably going to be NHL ready in the next year or two. Well, if you want to go that route, you're not going to be in the NHL for a while.
Yeah.
So, I wouldn't think so. He hasn't said anything negative. He was right about a lot of hockey. And by the way, he was back on the ice in mid-August again in another camp. So he was very busy, played a lot and played very well in those world championships. So it's legit. The communication might not have been the best. Obviously, Danny would have liked to have known more or whatever, but who knows? That's, water under the bridge. I we'll see what happens. He really is impressive to me. The bigger question is he a center or a forward? Not sure. But to me, he's a guy who looks really good coming off the wall with the pucks. It's going to be tough to take that away from him and put him in the middle of the ice. But big centers are such a great thing to have. So I'll be watching that. It's going to be a very interesting year for him in college, because he's got a whole bunch of talent coming into that team. So how the ice time's divvied up, who he plays with, certainly going to be worth watching for Flyers fans. But I'm not concerned. I mean, when I would have loved to have seen him at development camp for sure. We haven't really seen him in a flyer kind of element yet, and we all want to see that. But I can't imagine he'd want to go back for a third year. Of course, we got to see how the year goes. He really needs to take another step. He had a good first year, but he didn't dominate. So, we'll see how he does at BC, and we'll go from there. But I'm not too concerned. No, it's the way the system works. The Flyers drafted him. He's going to have to make it work here or have to wait quite a while.
And then, of course, Matt B. Mitchkoff, a lot of everyone knows the situation there, Russian player. Flyers are not going to pretty much be able to get him for 3 years. He signed a contract with the KHL, fell to number 7 in the draft. Arguably the second or the best player in the draft, not named Connor Bednard, was Matt B. Mitchkoff. And, he fell down to 7 for the contract issue in the KHL and supposedly some maybe character issues that with being a good teammate or whatnot. And now he's with Sochi in the KHL and hasn't been playing much lately, Jim Jackson, as one of our listeners here, Mr. Crockpot, chimes in and asks any reason to be concerned about Mitchkoff sitting lately in the KHL. What do you think about the development of Mitchkoff? Well, first of all, what do you think about the Flyers selecting him at 7? The development of him right now, and then when can we see him in the Flyers uniform? When's the earliest are we going to be able to see this guy in a Flyer uniform, JJ?
I mean, when he was drafted, to me, it was the absolute sign of where Danny and Keith's heads are at. It's about the future, because the guy they didn't pick who went to the Capitals is a prototypical Flyer. So this meant to me they're willing to go for a guy they can't get for 3 years. This is, they're willing to build for the future, but also elite talent is so hard to get. And he has elite talent. So it's worth the wait, the 3 years. I'm not too concerned about the 3 years because he'll be 21 into his 22-year-old year when he comes over. If it's after 3 years, most players don't really blossom. I'm not sure even Connor Bedard will blossom until that year. He might blossom a little earlier than most, but a lot of players don't really blossom until about that time anyhow, 21, 22, some a lot further along than that. So that didn't bother me as much. You just have to hope that he is here in 3 years. That he's not playing now, absolutely would concern me. They want him playing over there. The KHL is a good training ground for him if he is playing. He's playing with men. And as a youngster, a teenager playing against men, and not as long as he's not overmatched, and there's been no sign that he's going to be overmatched, then that's good training for him. He's going to get better. He's going to improve. He's going to develop. And so that's all good. But he does have to play. To miss 3 of the first 4 was, I'm sure the Flyers weren't happy with that. And the guy's too good to be sitting anyhow. So I don't know what's going on over there. Everything in Russia is a mystery. But they get him to Sochi, and now I think you'll see him play more, and we'll see how it transpires. But, yeah, you want him playing over there for sure.
Right. And 2 more questions, Jim, and I'll let you go because I know you've given me a lot of your time, and I greatly appreciate it. Question 1, to Jim Jackson, what is the new era of Orange? What does that mean to you?
New era Orange is it's about getting the team back to being a contender for the Stanley Cup going into every season. And the only way to do that is to build the level of talent and to do that through youth. And that's what Jonesy and Danny are going to do. So the new era Orange is about having a team that goes out there to compete every night. And they're going to do that under John Tortorella, even while they're building that talent base up. So you don't see the team give up on games. If you do, you're going to pay for it. As an individual player, you're going to pay for it with ice time. And John Tortorella has certainly shown he doesn't care who you are. If you aren't playing up to what he thinks is your full effort, you're not playing either in that game. He'll sit you right on the bench or scratch it for the next game. So I think the accountability level has gone up already and will continue to. And so you will have a team that will really, really play hard and represent Philadelphia. So that's kind of the new era of Orange in the present, but it's also about building toward the future by accumulating assets and talent. They've already started doing that. The process had actually already begun with the Claude Giroux trade and some other moves. So they're well on their way in that regard as well. And that's really what the new era of Orange is. I hesitate to say the new era of Orange is getting back to where they were because of that narrative we talked about earlier. There's almost a negative connotation about that. But, I was here in the 90s when they were perennial contenders into the aughts. It was pretty fun. Every season we thought we had a chance to win the Stanley Cup. That's really what the Flyers want to get back to. And they think they can do that, in the next couple, 2-3 years. And then, have that base of talent. And then it's, of course, about maintaining that. That's actually even a bigger challenge because of the salary cap, as teams like Tampa are finding out. How do you stay up there, keep that base of talent, and then build around it? You're going to have to lose players. So once you get there, you got to maintain it. But the Flyers have to get there first. And that's the process that's ongoing right now, the new era of Orange, if you will.
And so I like to add also on to what I think, what I like about what's been happening. Obviously, we're into rookie camp. Training camp starts at the end of the week. Then we get the preseason, and then October 12th, we got it going. But I do like the new uniforms. I like going back to the burnt orange. I think that's definitely new era of orange right there. And then this might sound weird to you, Jim, but the dual logos at center ice at the center just seems right to me. It never seemed right with just one logo at center ice for me. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's a small thing. I think you're going to see Keith Jones has a very distinct awareness of the tradition of the Flyers. And there's a lot of good in the tradition of the Flyers. So I think you'll see other signs of that might not be big time things for some people. They might not even notice that, which you just noticed, and several people on social media noticed as they put the painting on the ice. But I mean, those are little things that show you that they do have an eye on where this team was as well as where they're going to be. Those who ignore history are doomed to repeat it, as they say. And for the Flyers, in this case, it's about getting back to when they were contenders. And there are ways in which you can honor the past without being stuck in it. And that's what I think Jonesy will do. They're going to have another, Mark Recchi now going into the Hall of Fame. They're going to get back to having somebody else get into the Hall of Fame. You're just going to see things happening along those lines. The uniforms, I love them. I love them because the sleeve numbers are awesome, which make my job easier, because the jerseys they've had the last couple of years, the numbers overlap into the orange, and it just, from our level, or we're calling the game, just becomes a glob. I always had other teams announcers saying, yeah, your numbers are terrible. These numbers, black on white or whatever, that's great. You can see it very clear. It'll be nice to see those from up top.
And the last question, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about this. You do have a new partner coming and joining you this season. Obviously, Keith Jones is not going to be sitting in the broadcast, but maybe he would be. I don't know, but he obviously is not going to be doing that.
He'll be as far away from the booth as possible, I have a feeling.
Brian Boucher returning to the local broadcast. How cool is that? Is this another sign of the new era of Orange, paying some homage to the past here? But
yeah, cool. I think it's really paying homage to a really good broadcaster. Yeah. I have been absolutely blessed in my almost 30 years. It is 30 years broadcasting, but almost 30 on television, to have broadcast partners who were basically all national broadcasters. Gary Dornhofer was a national broadcaster on CBC in Canada before he came to Philadelphia. He was my first television analyst. Then it was Keith Jones and Bill Clement, both national broadcasters. And now it's going to be Brian Boucher, who is going to be national, has been with ESPN, now moving over to TNT. So I've had the best in the business next to me. I really am blessed. And Scotty Hartnell is going to fill in for Bush. I estimate somewhere between 12 and 15 games that Bush might miss. We don't know the exact amount yet due to his TNT obligations. And Scotty's such a great guy. Can't wait to work with him and develop him as a broadcaster. So really looking forward to it. I'll miss Jonesy. Worked with him for 17 years, and we had a chemistry, and always knew where he was going. He knew where I was going. But I've already worked with Bush. I worked with him, obviously, this past season. He filled in when Jonesy couldn't work. And then also I worked with him on some games on NBC. So very familiar with each other. Love working with him. It's going to be awesome. Can't wait for the season to get here.
October 12th, we drop the puck for real. Flyers, Blue Jackets. We'll get it all going. We'll get to say hi to Ivan Provorov right off the bat. And of course,
yes, we will. But not Mike Babcock.
Yeah, not Mike Babcock. But Ryan Fantilli, though. That's going to be interesting to see.
Yeah, really, the division all the division games are intriguing now, right? They're all going to be really, really interesting. Carlson in Pittsburgh, the Caps trying to hang on as Ovi goes for the record. Obviously, up top, you got Carolina and the Rangers, the Devils. It's just they're going to be fascinating games. And the Flyers are going in way under the radar. So we'll see how it goes.
Would you be surprised if a Flyer fan were to walk up to you in the street and say, Jones, JJ, the Flyers
I've been called worse.
The Flyers are going to make the playoffs in 2023-24. Would you be totally surprised if that was to come true? If the Flyers
I would be surprised. I would not be shocked. I'm only surprised in that they have a lot of question marks. And unfortunately, the last 3 years, almost every question mark went the wrong way, especially when it came to injuries. So, if Coots, he is such a big part of it because Sean Couturier, 80% or 85% of Sean Couturier is still one of the better two-way forwards in the NHL. And if he's able to come back, that slots everything back down a little bit in the middle and really means a lot to this team. He's a guy you want out there, up a goal, down a goal. So that would be huge. Cam Atkinson would give them a gunner on the wing, help the power play, the penalty kill. Plus, he's such a character guy. He's a guy who knows Torts, so he can help players relate to Torts. So if those two guys are able to be productive players, this team just picked up two really good free agents because neither of them played a single second last year.
Yep.
So that would be huge. The Carter Hart situation, we don't know what's going to happen there, but if he's with the team, you've got a quality goaltender. You got a lot of young goalies, Sam Harrison, one of them, and to see what happens with guys behind Carter, but you need that number one guy. And then, of course, the forwards, a bunch of young guys I'm really looking forward to seeing taking that next step, as we talked about earlier. I'm not really worried about the forwards. I think they can put together a pretty good top nine, and they could have a fourth line that could have Delorier and Hathaway and maybe Denoyer, and that could be pretty interesting. Denoyer can start some stuff. The other two guys can finish. It could be pretty interesting. So the forwards, I think, could really develop into a pretty deep group. Defense, there's more questions because you've lost Provorov in all those minutes. So who's going to step up? Cam York? Possibly. Is Emil Andre going to step in and become a contributor earlier than maybe some people expect? Is Travis Sanheim going to get back to where he was 2 seasons ago in the second half and be a definite top four defenseman? Is Ristolainen going to continue his improvement from last year? A lot of questions back there. But if you get more yeses than nos to these questions I'm asking, they absolutely can be in the running for a playoff spot. So if someone were to say they're going to make the playoffs, I would sit here and say, well, I'm not 100% sure they're going to be the playoffs, but it's not out of the realm of possibility. I think the Flyers prefer going in where they are, and all the national publications, no one expects them to even come close to the playoffs. And even some of their own fan base, I think they don't expect them to be even close to the playoffs. I think the Flyers kind of like that. But deep down, I think, if they get to more yeses than nos, as I said, to some of those questions we threw out there, they could absolutely at least be in contention in March, heading into April. And at that point, it's anybody's guess. But John Tortorella, I saw the excitement in him late last year that you were alluding to earlier. He'd come up to us and say, I can't wait. I'm already starting to look. And this was after Forster came up and looked good. And he said, I'm starting to put together some combinations for next year. I'm really liking what I'm seeing. And I'm sure those combinations did not include Kevin Hayes because in his mind, it probably was already, going the way it went. So I think he's legitimately excited to see what he can put together here in training camp. So, is a playoff spot. If I were saying odds right now, I would say probably less than 50%. But if you went nationally right now, they'd probably give him a 5% chance of making the playoffs, right? I think it's better than that. And I think they do have a chance if they get some things to break their way. Most notably health. Got to be healthier than they've been the last 3 years. What leads to that, I have no idea, but you can't have these crippling injuries where guys are gone for the whole year that are top line center, top defenseman, all that. So if they're a little healthier, Matt, I think, they could contend for a playoff spot.
I'm also going to toss Adder's name, Zamula's name into the defenseman.
No, Zamula has to get time because he's not waiver exempt anymore. And Ronnie Addard is, he's to the point where he's done almost what he has to do to get a shot too. But with Walker and Stahl,
Yeah.
you've got a numbers issue back there. You're gonna have to earn your spot, and I think that's the way it should be. You can't just come in and because you're a prospect get a spot. You have to earn it. But if either of those two guys, Mueller or Eddard, have really good camps, they should make the team. That's what this is about, looking for those young players that are going to take this step. If Tyson Forster comes in and has a bad camp, he's not going to make the team. But if he has a good camp, he very definitely should make the team. Emil Andre, if he has a really good camp, I think he makes the team. So the play, as what is it the GM says and the coaches say, the players will answer those questions. We'll see by their performances in the camp and more so in the preseason games. And then they'll go from there, and we'll see how it all pans out. But I'm excited. We see what the future is now. We see it in front of us. Some of the players that are here, some of the players that might be here, and some of the players that are coming down the road with a coach who's driven and with leadership now that has their eye on the present, but also the future. So with that plan in place, really looking forward to this season and the new era of Orange.
And one last thing. Does John Tortorella name a captain for the 20?
I don't think so. He didn't really mince words last year. And John Tortorella seems to be a man of his word. But he said, don't plan on a captain next year either. Now, something could happen where he just sees somebody jump out in camp that is such a leader. I mean, Scott Lawton could do that. Sean Couturier could do that, I suppose. But from what he said last year, I would not anticipate a captain for the Flyers this year. But, hey, things change. But certainly at the end of last year, he gave no indication, did Torts, that there'd be a captain this year.
He sure as heck didn't. Jim Jackson, thank you very much. Is there anything you want to plug and you want to tell people where they can find you out there, or we just look for you here in about this week, right, or next week against the Bruins is the first preseason game?
Yeah, I think our first broadcast is the first home game, which I believe is the 30th, so it's still a ways off. JimJacksonBroadcasting.com. You can find everything. I have broadcast coaching that I do that you can find a link there. All kinds of other stuff, Cameo and YouTube and all this. But the coaching is something that I do all summer. And obviously with the schedule picking up into the season, I have to fit the classes in and around the schedule a little more. So I have to tail back a little, but I do not stop. I still do the coaching. So if you have anybody out there who wants to get into broadcasting, it's not just play-by-play, certainly not just hockey play-by-play. It's play-by-play in all sports. It's sideline reporting. It's talk show hosting on radio. It's anchoring. It's podcast hosting. Matt, welcome to become a student of mine.
I would love to.
But I've had people from ages 12 to 59. So, JimJacksonBroadcasting.com is the website. You can find the broadcast coaching right there. Have fun with it. Really have enjoyed doing it the last 3 years.
My own people are telling me I need to join up with your program, Jim. So, yeah.
Can I train you? That might be a challenge. I can see you go after some of the negative points, but that's what you're there to do as an interviewer. So, that's the way you get your best answers.
You mentioned Howie Roseman. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole with you. I'm not the biggest Howie Roseman guy out there, so I'm going to leave Howie to it. We'll be here for 7 hours.
How are you not a Howie Roseman guy?
Tim, don't do this to me, please.
Well, I'll say this. Keith Jones has said they are the model. The Eagles are the model because look what he's done. I mean, I will tell you right now, I am not an Eagles fan. All right. Okay. But he has done a remarkable job of making them competitive and still having room to somehow go out and get players. Now that's going to change a little bit with Hurt's contract. I understand that. But to this point, I mean, last year he loads up with all these defensive tackles. The Giants fans had to be thinking, we stink and we don't have any room to add these players. And he was adding players. He got you a Super Bowl win. He got you almost another Super Bowl win. What could be your complaint with Howie Roseman?
Jimmy, you don't want to. You want to backtrack.
Well, in a nutshell, just give it to me. In a nutshell.
In a nutshell. I don't have my chart in front of me, but I'll give you a nutshell. I don't like his drafting overall record. He's missed too many times for my taste in the draft. Why did Doug Peterson get fired in 2020 after the check came due for 3 years after the Super Bowl of not being competitive or not being able to run it back? Why wasn't Howie part of that casualty? He should have been. It was Howie who gave him that roster. Then the last thing is I don't like the stripping down of the team on a year-to-year basis and rebuilding it year to year. I just don't think that's how you build a dynasty. That might be how you catch lightning in a bottle and how you tie that.
You almost have to. I mean, watch what the Chiefs are doing it now. You can't keep everybody. because the contracts for the quarterbacks in particular are getting so out of control. You can't. It's almost like the NHL with Tampa. You know, they keep their 4 or 5 guys. The Eagles still have guys that have been successful with them for a long time. I look around the league. There's not many teams that have guys like Fletcher Cox that are there that long, or Brandon Graham, you got to kind of almost have to, don't you? How do you not strip it down?
Well, so what I look is the model of those New England Patriot teams of the last decade or the last couple of decades. And heck, we'll go back to the Eagles of Andy Reid.
The England Patriots were Tom Brady.
Let's go to the Eagles.
It's true. It's been proven it was Tom Brady. He had 5,000 different receivers, 5,000 different running backs, 5,000 different defensive stars for those teams. What was the one constant? And then when he left, what happened to the team? It was clearly Tom Brady. I mean,
I'm not. Listen, I'm going to say,
how good are they now? Without
70-30. It was
Belichick hasn't really been able to get them back to being very good, has he?
Not a horrible quarterback right now. That's why. And where he had.
But the bottom line is his other quarterback went back and won a Super Bowl with another team the first year. I mean, I'm a big Tom Brady fan. I will admit to it. But he's the best ever. Mahomes has to do what he's doing for about 10 more years before I even consider him being in Brady's class. He might just do that because I love Mahomes too. But the bottom line is, you bring up the Patriots. The after the fact is proven that it was Tom Brady. I mean, he had more to do with it than Bill Belichick. Belichick's a great coach. Don't get me wrong. He still confuses quarterbacks with his defenses and all that. But the team has become mediocre since Tom Brady left. And Tom Brady, won a Super Bowl. His team his last season was mediocre. But, he won a Super Bowl as getting away from the Patriots. That was the statement right there.
But I guess maybe more like
what this has to do with Howie Roseman, I don't know. But hey, I'm not saying Howie's perfect, but you should be happy with the way the Eagles are run. They are.
I loathe Howie Roseman. I loathe him. I want him out of here so bad. It's not even funny, Jim. I can't.
How much were you cheering when he was put in the background and old Chip was running the show?
Not at all. Because to me, at that point, you got to understand, coming out of the Andy Reid era, where it was all Andy, and then Chip Kelly was the next greatest thing. I really didn't pay much attention to who was calling the shots when it was drafting. Then it became very evident when Howie came out of the back room and he won us a Super Bowl. And I'm not ignorant to that fact. I am an Eagle fan.
You can't be ignorant to that fact.
I'm not going to be
again. You got to go. You got to not just that they won the Super Bowl, that they became a contending team. Now, the drop out of the Super Bowl, Doug Peterson did have some really weird decisions the year he got fired. I mean, he made some game management decisions were mind-boggling to me. And again, I'm not an Eagles fan. And Doug Peterson's proven he's a great coach by going to Jacksonville and doing what he's doing there. But he was not great his last year as Eagles coach. He really wasn't. So I could see why Howie at that point might be saying, the shelf life on coaches isn't really long. Bill Belichick, he's been there a long time. Mike Tomlin, but not many stay too long with their teams. So, how long was Doug really going to stay there as head coach? So
absolutely,
blaming Howie for Doug Peterson. Yeah.
If we were going to make that move, it should have been both of them getting fired, because both of them, in my opinion, had equal hands in the whole.
Yeah, well, Howie rebuilt them pretty quickly, didn't he?
Not really. No, I mean,
not really.
We haven't won a Super Bowl.
They were one of the best teams in the league, and they're considered to be one of the best teams again this year.
We didn't win. We didn't win.
You didn't win. Here we go. Right back to what I said to you about general management. He got you to the Super Bowl within a drive of winning. You can't blame the general manager at that point. That's just a play. That's a play by a player from another team, a Patrick Mahomes or something that won the game. It's not Howie Roseman's fault they lost the Super Bowl. You can't be serious. You're not telling me that Howie Roseman cost them the Super Bowl last year.
I'm not saying he cost them the Super Bowl. It wasn't obviously his in-game decisions, but it was the roster he built was ultimately with inadequate players to finish the job and beat the only good team they played last year, Jim. The Chiefs were the only elite team the Eagles played last year.
And they just about beat them. They just about beat them.
But they lost.
That's not on Howie Roseman. I mean,
he brought in
so many quality players down the stretch, got that team to dominate their conference, and they lose to an all-time quarterback in the last minute. and you're blaming the GM. That I'm sorry, Matt, that is just ridiculous.
You're
It really
missing
is.
the point.
You
I'm
could
not
blame
blaming
the
GM.
head coach more than you could blame the general manager about losing that game because there were
But
probably decisions he made.
who
And I'm
puts
not
the
saying
team
that should be
together?
the case either because he did a great job coaching last year, but the coach has more to do with losing a single game than the general manager. So, I mean, you just have it out for Howie. That's all.
I do not.
I'll take this out of it, Matt, rather than saying you don't know what you're talking about. I'll just say you have it out for Howie because to blame Howie for them not winning the Super Bowl. I mean, their defensive coordinator, yeah, some things were weird there. That's a terrible part about the NFL system. The coaches should not be allowed to talk to other teams before they're done or be considered for a job. They shouldn't even allow coaches to be hired until after the Super Bowl. I know that's a problem for the draft and all that, but it's to me, it should be concentrating on the Super Bowl, not on the job, right? So I understand again all that stuff, but to blame Howie is he's done an unbelievable job. And then to lose some of the players they had to lose and to kind of backfill and be right there, considered by most to be one of the top 3 or 4 contenders for the Super Bowl again this year. That's how you did that. So, I mean, I do understand your draft conversation. That one I'll give you. He's missed on some draft picks. He's also hit on some, but he's missed on some too. I don't think he missed on this year's first rounder, by the way, and I don't think he missed on a certain second round pick a little while back who's running the team pretty well. But he did miss on some guys. I understand that. But in general, he got him to a Super Bowl, won a Super Bowl, had the fall off, did fire the coach, and got him right back into where they could have easily won the Super Bowl last year and may win it this year. That's good. That's being a good GM. That's a GM who's been able to recycle, start over kind of, and get right back up in less than 5 years. I mean, that's good, Matt. That's not bad. That's being a good GM. And I don't know Howie. So I've met him a couple of times, but I mean, I don't know him. I'm not a friend of his, so that's not why I'm saying this. But it's just you got to look at the overall results. You're going to miss on some draft picks. You can't miss on too many, as the Flyers, may have in the teams and so forth, which led to them not having organizational depth, which led to some of the problems they've had. But Howie hasn't missed on that many probably, and if he has, he's made up for it with some of his acquisitions. But Lane Johnson, I mean, you can there's some pretty good picks he's made too.
Lane Johnson wasn't a Howie pick.
Yeah, who was he?
He was either a Chip Kelly pick or he was a Chip Kelly pick. It was 2013. Howie was really new to the job at that point. I'm sure it was a Chip Kelly pick.
Yeah.
Carson
you would
Wentz
say that. I don't know that. Was Howie the GM when they picked him?
But picked what? Carson Wentz or Lane Johnson?
Lane Johnson.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, he was. He was.
Carson Wentz. I laugh now because that's revisionist history. Revisionist history. Everyone was raving about that pick and raving about it a year or two later until he got hurt on his way to an MVP. So to criticize him again 5 years later, that's so fanish. That's basically
Jim. It's not fanish.
Did you criticize it when he made the pick?
Yes, I did.
Okay, well then you have the right to do that. I know so many people in the media and fans who loved Carson Wentz and loved him while he was playing so well early in his career. And then after it went south, what a terrible pick. You can't, there's no credibility to that. If you liked the pick when it happened and you liked him when he was starting well, you can't suddenly say, wow, what a terrible pick by Howie Roseman. Injuries happen, players change. Sometimes GMs can't account for that. Who would you have picked, by the way?
So I don't know if I would have even gone. I don't even know if I would have gone up to 2 in that situation. I think I would have sat back at 8 with that Dolphin pick. I don't know if I would have gone up to 2. And I wasn't really in love with any of the quarterbacks that year of the Jared Goff draft class. I wasn't really in love with any of the quarterbacks that year. I know the Eagles were in a market for a quarterback then, obviously, but I don't know. I don't know. I wasn't really. I forget who I was looking at, but it wasn't. I wasn't ready to mortgage the future to go up to 2 for the opportunity to pick either Jared Goff or Carson Wentz. Honestly.
Yeah, and what were you feeling when he was on his way to an MVP before he got hurt?
So in 17, before the injury against the Rams, he was having a great Super Bowl. But I give you this: that they don't win the Super Bowl if he's the quarterback. They only won that Super Bowl with Nick Foles. They
How
don't
do you
win
know that?
Carson.
You don't know.
I'm just saying. I don't think
you just don't know that.
I don't think they do.
You can say you don't think they do, but you can't say they don't because you don't know that.
No, I don't. But I
The
don't.
way Carson Wentz was playing that year, I disagree with you. But and to be honest with you, that was a miracle. I watched Nick Foles in the first playoff game he played that year, and the team was I mean, they were so lucky to win that game. The interception off the leg, that whole stuff. That they were very fortunate to win. Not they were great once they got to the championship game, but they were very fortunate
Oh
to
yeah.
win the one.
Julio
And
Jones should never have dropped that ball in the end zone. That was a
yeah,
catch he
yeah.
makes 99 out of 100 times.
Yeah.
I agree.
But
I
that
agree.
happens on your way to any championship, just as things go against you, which keep you from winning championships, which are not the GM's fault or not even the coach's fault. It takes a lot of luck to win a championship. It takes other things, but luck's part of it as well. Especially today where we're getting in sports, because there's so much balance. There's it used to be, even in the NFL, 4 or 5 teams could really win the Super Bowl. By the end of this season, there's going to be a couple of teams we don't even think are close right now that might actually be Super Bowl contenders. I mean, the Eagles this time last year were not considered Super Bowl contenders, and they became one, right? There may be, who knows, maybe Atlanta becomes a dominant team this year, or one of these teams that's surprising us with their start. You don't know. It changes a lot more. Back in the day in the NFL, it was always the Rams, the Cowboys, the Niners, then into the 80s, the Niners, the Giants, all the same teams, Washington. They were always good year after year after year. It's not like that anymore because of the cap and the free agency and all that. So we just don't know. But we do know there's a lot more teams that could possibly win the Super Bowl. Now, I know the know-it-alls are out there going to say, no, really, it's either Kansas City or Buffalo but yeah, come back to me in February because last year no one thought the Eagles were a Super Bowl team at this time in September. So, and it's quite possible. I'm trying to give me some help here. Name a team that really could surprise and become a Super Bowl contender this year in either conference. I mean, maybe it is Atlanta. They run the heck out of the football. They got a good defense. Detroit. I mean, some people kind of has said they are, though, so that would be even more. That would be less of a surprise than maybe the Eagles. But that's a good. They haven't been to the playoffs, so that's a good choice.
Carolina.
How about the AFC?
AFC,
Miami could surprise a lot of people. So there's just more teams that are capable of making that surge now than there used to be, and I think that's that way in all sports. In the other sports, it's more teams are in the playoffs now, especially baseball, so that anybody that gets in baseball, because playoff baseball is so different than regular season baseball in terms of pitching and all that. I don't like it in baseball. I think 162 games, you should have fewer teams in the playoffs. It's such a long season. Make it worth something. I mean, the Phillies last year, case in point. I mean, that was not a team based upon the regular season that should have been in the World Series.
Nope.
But, they are made. And similarly this year, if they're going to get in, and they could take down the Braves easily, even though the Braves are absolutely a better baseball team.
Jim, I got to ask you. You brought it up. I'm going to ask you this right now. I got to know your stance on this with the Phillies. Kyle Schwarber, leadoff hitter, yes or no? What do you want to do with him?
Well, let me temper anything I say about this. I don't follow the Phillies anymore.
Okay.
I don't. What happened is, for 14 years I had to watch every pitch, right? And I loved it. Loved every second of it. Loved every second of having to listen to Scott Fransky call every pitch because he's the best in the business. But when they severed ties, I suddenly had summers off, and I rediscovered golf, swimming, going on vacations longer than an all-star break length. And I found that I didn't really care. Now, my first year out was 3 years ago, and the game was still slow. They were taking 3 hours and 40 minutes, and it just wasn't. Baseball was changing in a bad way when I got out, so I wasn't really loving the game as much. Anyhow, I like the changes that have been made. They've picked up the pace of the game and all that, but I don't watch many games, so I'm no expert. Just in general, I would rather have a guy like Schwarber deeper down the lineup, but I haven't watched the team on a daily basis to say it works, it doesn't work. It seemed to work last year at times, but generally I'm a guy that likes to have the power guy a little bit lower in the lineup. And now that the stolen base and things are back in vogue in baseball because of the changes that have been made, I think you want to have, a Trey Turner or a guy with some speed up there at the top, getting on base and setting the table. But again, I have not seen enough of the team. I root for them from afar, but I don't watch every game. It's funny when you have to watch every game for so long, you when you don't have to anymore, you don't.
No, I
So
understand that totally.
that's really what's happened.
No, I totally get that, and thank you because I follow your lead on the college score thing. He's batting 197, doesn't belong leading off. I know he hit a monstrous home run tonight, but that's all it is with him, home run or nothing. So I want to capitalize on those home runs down there in the bottom and deeper in the lineup where there's potentially more runners on base. So
How
I
many of
agree
his
with that.
homers have been solo homers this year?
Yeah, most of them have been. So
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
Edge of Philly Sports wants to know, do you get combat pay for this interview? I don't know. You'll have to talk to you guys about that, Edge of Philly Sports. That's above my pay grade. So no, Jim.
I don't get combat pay. You might want combat pay because I came at you pretty hard. But
I don't like
I know I'm just answering your questions. You happen to strike 2 chords of mine with
That's
your
good.
first 2 questions.
That's
So I was like, the old, it's about the old players thing is just something I don't like. And the other was the fact that, since Comcast took over, they don't care or whatever. They care. There's just been mistakes in judgment based on how to spend the money, not how much money is being spent. I can tell you, ask players. No players, no teams players are treated better than the Flyers. They get all the best in terms of travel, in terms of facilities, and you can't spend money any other way anymore. You can't go out and buy, like you still can in baseball. You can go out and buy success, which largely the Phillies have. You can't do that in hockey. You can't do that in basketball unless you're really creative, and hard to do in football too. The salary cap makes it where you have to be really, really astute with your judgments, get breaks, have players stay healthy, and go from there. So be very interesting to see um, if baseball ever gets to that stage, because you look at year in and year out, the teams that are competing, except for Tampa, who somehow figures out a way to be successful without a huge payroll. It's the teams who spend the most that are at the top. I mean, it's just that way. The Dodgers, the Red Sox for so long, the Yankees for so long. Now they've fallen off, but they'll bounce right back because they'll spend a lot of money. Phillies are part of that group now. The Braves are interesting because they spend, but not to that quite the same degree. But it's really, I mean, it's really the haves and have-nots in baseball. You get the anomaly of the Royals there a couple of years and Tampa Bay, but in a lot of ways, it is that way. And in Steven's question, my favorite moment, yes, Preem's goal, one of them. That was my favorite moment to call. I'm not sure my call was actually my favorite call. I didn't know what I was saying at that hour, but 2010, the shootout win over the Rangers, where Bush, my now partner, makes the save. That was maybe my favorite call because for once in my life, one of the rare times in my life, I was a minimalist. I didn't say too much, and it's tough for me. I just not a minimalist, as you can tell by nature. So the fact that I was able to do it in that instant, I was happy with. And then, when Gagne scored to complete the comeback later in that year against Boston to complete the 3-0 comeback, both in the series and the game, that's right up there. And then the last one I would include would be 2004, Jeremy Roenick's goal up in Toronto after Sammy Kapanen got belted, and the whole sequence was crazy. And I was just about out of oxygen by the time JR scored. And says the Phillies to the conference final, whatever I said, but whatever I said was 5 octaves higher than I normally say it. And those are probably the moments I remember. But the good thing is I've done the game almost 3 decades that there's so many, I can't mention them all, that I just love what I do. And I'm blessed to have done what I've done for the last 30 years and to work with the great people I've worked with. And before I'm done, and that day's coming sooner rather than later, I want to get back to calling a team that is legitimately contending for the Stanley Cup again. And I think we have the right people in place to get us there.
I think that goal against the Rangers might be top 10 in Flyers history of important goals. I honestly do.
Which goal against
the
the
one
Rangers?
that sent them into the playoffs in overtime that year?
The save, yeah. I mean,
yeah.
Giroux scored the goal, and he made the save.
That might be one of the top 10 moments in Flyers history.
Just out of the side of my eye, I just saw a play where a guy made a great catch, got up, spikes the ball in play. Was he touched? No.
That's what the fumble.
he gets up, he doesn't go out of bounds, and he spiked it. I think it ended up rolling out of bounds. But if Carolina recovered, these
Fly ball.
celebrations are amazing.
Yep.
But anyway, lots to talk about in sports, man. You can have me on anytime. We don't have to even talk Flyers. You guys do a post-game show, is that correct?
So we do a Phillies and a Flyers post-game show here on the Edge of
That's a lot of shows.
Yeah, and I'm part of both of them. We also do articles. You can check our written stuff over on the website. I've been doing a player spotlight on the Flyers this year, on the players for this coming team. So yeah, you have an open invitation to come to any show you want. Just
it might be a time where I want to do a post game show. Maybe when the games when I'm not doing it, where it's a national game or something, I'll pop in.
Absolutely.
But I've thought about doing something on my own along those lines, just popping on after games on YouTube or something. I'm wondering if there'd be any market for that. But
absolutely,
yeah, I mean, or maybe doing daily hit in the morning to talk about the game the night before. Just open it up, have a live chat if people want to ask questions, that kind of thing. I thought about a bunch of different things, but haven't put them into action. And now it's too close to the season probably to do it this year, but maybe down the road. But yeah, shoot me an invitation at some point, or remind me when you see a game coming up, where I obviously wouldn't be able to do it when we're on the road because we travel right after the game. But especially if you see a game where there's a national telecast and I'm not doing the game, maybe I'll pop on after the game.
You got it. We'll definitely do that. And for those of you out there, obviously, be on the lookout or listen out for Mr. Jim Jackson coming back this year, October 12th. That's when the regular season begins, but they'll be doing some preseason stuff as well. Jim, it's a pleasure. You were on for a while. I thank you. We could do this all night.
I was going to work out after our show, but you have now given me the excuse. It's too late to work out. I won't sleep well. So you gave me an excuse not to work out, which is a good thing now. Probably I'll feel it tomorrow and a bad thing, but it was fun, Matt. I love talking, as you can tell, talking sports, talking Flyers in particular, but talking all sports. So it was fun and nothing personal. But your Howie Roseman take is
no, you're wrong. Howie Roseman's a fraud, and he's a disease to the Philadelphia Eagles.
He's a fraud.
Destroyed.
He might go to the Hall of Fame as a general manager. If they win another Super Bowl, he's going to the Hall of Fame.
I disagree. 2 more Super Bowls I'll give you. Not another one. 2 more, yeah.
But if you're the GM and you win you take your team to 2 Super Bowl wins in 2 different what's the word I'm looking for?
Like head coaches?
No, not makings, but 2 different
eras,
versions of your team. I mean, it's too close to say era because there's still some players that would have been on both teams, but he's remade the team and go back and win another Super Bowl.
He remakes the team every year. That's the problem. He remakes the team.
You almost have to. And with Hurts making the money he's making now, they're going to have to do that. I mean,
Hurts are struggling too a little bit this year to start the season.
Yeah, but you know what? How much you see, you lose both coordinators. It takes a while. And Joe Burrow, I think some of these guys will get into the swing eventually, but I mean, it's really hard to figure out the NFL. Look at the Giants. They get outscored 60-0 in their first 6 quarters, and then score 31 points. It's like, how do you figure this stuff out? It's just amazing.
You don't.
It's fun. The NFL's just got it right. They just know how to do it. I mean, Washington. The Hail Mary by Denver, and then clearly interference in the end zone, not called. So you got controversy always. It's the NFL's. I love the NHL. I'm involved, obviously, in my work in the NHL, but I'm as big an NFL fan as anything. I've got DVDs sitting over here to my right of almost every NFL playoff game since late 70s when they started recording them. So I'm a huge NFL fan. And the NFL just gets it. It's perfect for this country too, because it's once a week and we can focus on it, get ready for it, get pumped up, and then, get back and get ready for another year. So having said all that, NFL knows what it's doing, but having said all that, the NHL is right there too. I can't wait for the season to start, and I would love to come on with you guys after a game. So let me know.
This is the best time of the year. You got baseball playoffs starting. You got football season ongoing, both college and pro, and you got hockey starting. It's the best time of the year.
It is. I mean, the only comparable time, but the problem is there's no NFL, is that, March Madness leading into the playoffs for the NBA and the NHL and the NFL draft somewhere around there too. That's a real good time of year too. But yeah, this is, I would agree with you. This is the best time.
All right, Jim. Again,
We
thank
finally
you.
agree on something, Matt.
Yes, it took an hour and a half.
We can now end the conversation.
All right, Jim Jackson joins me. Jim, the voice of the Flyers. Good luck on another great season. I'm sure you'll
Thanks,
do it
Matt.
all proud every year. And go Flyers.
Looking forward to it.
Wow, Jim Jackson, an hour and 20 minutes. It was supposed to be about a 45-minute interview, but we go down the rabbit hole of Howie Roseman, and this is what happens. I did not script that. All right, that was his own thing. I'm not going to stop him, but don't do that, man. I begged him not to go down that road. I said, Jim, we can't do that. But no, it was fun. All in good fun. Jim Jackson joins me. Open invitation anytime he wants to come back. That might have been one of the funnest interviews I've ever done. So thank you, Jim. All right, so as I mentioned, we're an hour and 20 minutes in. Kyle Quinn is a no-show. I don't know what's going on. I'll have to talk to Kyle off the air and find out what happened. So we're going to transition a little bit, and I'm going to do the Birds breakdown with Kyle. I'll be Kyle and me at the same time. So this is the Birds breakdown with Kyle Quinn. Of course, I hosted the post-game show on Sunday with the Eagles-Vikings. Not too much more than what really needs to be talked about, what we talked about earlier in the post game. The team is off to a kind of a sluggish start. They did win 34-28, but obviously they're having some problems trying to get on the same page. We mentioned it with me and Jim talking about some of the problems with this team with the coordinators. Maybe they're just having some issues with the chemistry of this football team. 34-28 though is your final score. Next up for the Eagles, Tampa next Monday night. I have this as a win all day long. I don't fear Baker Mayfield. I don't fear anything that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are bringing to bear. I get it that they're 2-0, but I just think the Eagles are a more superior team. I got the Eagles winning this game 27-17. My player of the game would be Jalen Hurts. I just think that the Eagles are just a better team than the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I will get you Kyle Quinn's score posted up on the website at a later time. But I'm going to go with the Eagles on this one, 27-17. And don't forget, I will not be on next Monday because it's Eagles Monday Night Football. So we'll join you a week from Monday, and we'll come back and recap the Buccaneers and look forward towards the Week 4 matchup against the Commanders. So I don't know if Kyle could follow Jim Jackson up tonight. That would have been interesting. But I'll get with Kyle, find out what went down. But I can tell you what's going down with Philly Sports Strips. If you want to travel like the pros, look no further than Philly Sports Strips. They got you covered. Head over to their website at phillysportstrips.com. They got you covered for the Eagles, Flyers, Sixers, and Phillies. When you're done with all that and you're trying to wrap up your day, head on down to Dolan's Bar down on 24 East Sellers Ave in Ridley Park for Quizzo music, great times, memorabilia giveaway. You never know who's going to come through the front door at Dolan's. And Sherry's tickets for the great price, the best prices on tickets, theater, and sports. Venue, no hidden fees, www.sherrystickets.com. Save an additional 10% at EOP10 if you enter the promo code. And our main man, Dave Cherry, for motor vehicle accidents, workman's comp, personal injury, or criminal law. Dave Cherry at 610-565-0300. Got you covered. Again, awesome interview with Jim. Pretty much the narratives that we've been talking about all offseason with the Flyers. It's about the youth movement. It's about these kids getting opportunities to play. It's not having the expectations of winning a Stanley Cup right now. It's getting back to those Flyers standards. And that's exactly what he sees happening down there. And I think everybody else sees it from the outside looking in. And I do have a problem with the team not winning a cup in 50 years. But I do have a problem with that. So hopefully they can get it right this year. Well, not win a cup this year, but get this thing moving in the right direction for the years to come. And it was a great time talking with Jim and say, Kyle, not showing up tonight. I'll find out what's going on. He might have texted me. I don't have my phone with me. So we did run really late. So it's probably a good thing that he didn't. But I'll get Kyle's pick up there for you. Also, real quick, before I do sign off, let me give you my week 3 NFL picks because we are at that time. I'm 7-7 right now for week 2. Heading into tonight's game, which I have no idea what's going on in that game. I'm 7-7. It's horrible. I mean, 8-7 or 8-8 last week, and now 7-7 so far this week. Next week, though, I'm going to go with the Eagles and Buccaneers. I already told you I think the Eagles will win. Just a superior team, better team. I think that mantra holds for the Eagles through week 4. After that, though, all bets are off. The Eagles got to start playing good football. So I got the Eagles beating Tampa Bay tomorrow at that, or on Monday, next Monday night. On the Sunday's game, Giants are in San Fran. San Fran is the team in this one. Tennessee at Cleveland. I'm going Cleveland. I don't know what it's about, but I'm going to go Cleveland. Atlanta against Detroit. Detroit comes back, rebounds from that heartbreaker in week 2. New Orleans and Green Bay. Green Bay, give me them. Denver and Miami. Miami looked really good last night. Chargers versus the Vikings. Give me the Chargers. Patriots and Jets. I'm going with the Jets, but I'm starting to lose faith in them. I'm starting to lose faith in the Jets. And Buffalo and Washington, give me Buffalo. Houston at Jacksonville, give me Jacksonville. Indianapolis at Baltimore, give me the Ravens. Carolina at Seattle, give me Seattle. Chicago at KC. Dallas at Arizona. It pains me to say this. Give me Dallas. Pittsburgh versus the Raiders. Give me the Raiders. That is your Sunday night game and your second Monday night game. There's 2 of them next week. The Rams and the Bengals. Give me the Rams in a Super Bowl rematch. Edge of Phillies tells me that Chubb snapped his leg. Well, not good. Not good at all. So there's an update of what's happening tonight on Monday Night Football. Again, I got the Eagles winning next week against Tampa. Lackluster performance by them against the Vikings, but they did enough to win. There's some internal rumblings and grumblings. The depth is being tested now with injuries to Avonte Maddox, who can't ever stay on the field. You know, we're going to wait and see. This isn't 2022. Maybe that should be what the new Eagle motto is this year. Not to say they're not going to win these games, but they're not going to be as pretty as they were, or as surgical, I should say, as they were last year. So that was fun. Steve, who's been commenting all night, that's why JJ survived this town for so long. His passion is real. Yeah, absolutely. Very real passion. So yeah, it's a good interview with Jim Jackson. So there's my takes on the Eagles. I got them beating Buccaneers next week. I also got Jalen Hurts as my player of the game. I think he has a bounce back game. I think he tears apart the Tampa Bay secondary. And that is going to do it for me tonight. Don't forget, check us out. Let me pop up the schedule. I do have that on here. Here's our schedule for this week. We've got some Fightins final all week long, Braves and Mets. And this is everything else that's happening on the network this week. Make sure you're stopping by and checking out regularly. Until we talk again, folks, what do they say? That is the news. And I'm outie.